Outside of the debate itself, yesterday may have been the worst day of Joe Biden's bid to get reelected here in 2024. Good morning. Happy Wednesday morning. Thanks for joining us on 95.7 FM KCMO. So 3 things happened yesterday that signal to me the media is officially over Joe Biden. 3 reports dropping yesterday. The media doesn't do anything without making sure they are swimming in the same direction. It's not a coincidence that you get these stories from the New York Times, NBC News, and CNN that just happen to make the president of the United States look absolutely horrible. But that's what we got yesterday. So let's start with the New York Times piece. New York Times writes an article here, headlined, Biden's lapses are said to be increasingly common and worrisome. Writing here, people who have spent time with President Biden over the last few months or so said the lapses appear to have grown more frequent, more pronounced, and after Thursday's debate, more worrisome. You think that the New York Times is just writing that without careful coordination? Just a month ago, not even, they were telling you Joe's great, cheap fakes, deep fakes, the whole deal. That's number one. Then number 2, NBC News, headline here. Hunter Biden has joined White House meetings as he stays close to the president post-debate. They write here, Hunter Biden has joined meetings with President Joe Biden and his top aides since his father returned to the White House from Camp David, according to 4 people familiar with the matter. The president's son has also been talking to senior White House staff members. While he is regularly at the White House residence and events, leaving his cocaine, sorry, I added that line, it is unusual for Hunter Biden to be in and around meetings his father is having with his team, these people said. They said the president's aides were struck by his presence during their discussions. You know, you can be empathetic towards Hunter Biden's situation and the family situation, but one of the reasons I lack empathy for the entire family is because of nonsense like this. Hunter Biden has been enabled by Joe and Jill to be put in these types of situations where he has no business being. Whether it's deals overseas with bad actors to, allegedly enrich the family, whether it's reports like this. You can love your son, as every parent should love their child, but also realize where to draw the line. And Hunter Biden now popping in to senior staff meetings at the White House is beyond absurd and beyond disturbing. And it should be for every single American, whether you voted for Joe Biden or not. It should be beyond disturbing. So that was strike number 2. You got the New York Times suddenly writing that Joe Biden's mental lapses are increasingly common and worrisome. You've got NBC dropping this, that Hunter Biden is now joining high-level staff meetings. And then the third thing that dropped yesterday in the media as they try to oust Joe Biden, that's what's going on here, is this report from CNN on why Joe Biden debated so poorly.
Apparently, the president apologized to everyone in the room, saying this is not an excuse, but it is an explanation. And he blamed the extensive foreign travel that he did in the lead up to the CNN debate for his poor performance. Just a reminder for everyone, he did go to France for the D-Day anniversary, and then he turned right back around and went to Italy for the G7 summit. And he told the room, I didn't listen to my staff. So the suggestion there being his staff did not think this was a good idea. And then he apparently said, I almost fell asleep on stage. I just want to unpack this new explanation for a second, as the explanation for why his debate performance was so bad.
Wait, what? They're blaming D-Day, which was 3 weeks before the debate. 3 weeks. I mean, Mark, I drove out to Abilene for our D-Day show to the Eisenhower Museum. My shows have sucked for the better part of 4 weeks, and I'm going to blame that. That's what I'm going to blame, by the way.
Yeah, you should probably be taking a nap right now.
Yeah,
It's
you're
been
right.
a few weeks.
Yeah, I know. I got to get the nap back on the rotation and in the schedule. And so back-to-back trips to Europe. Okay, let's not forget, the guy returned from Europe on June 15th. The debate was June 27th. He spent a week holed up at Camp David to prepare for the debate. If you are sluggish from trips 12 days prior, and by the way, he's not sitting there on some United flight like a sardine getting thrown a bag of Cheez-Its every couple of hours. And the guy's on Air Force freaking One, for crying out loud. If you are blaming that for why you are not mentally up for the job, and physically, more importantly, up for the job, then you can't do the job. This piggybacks off of the reports earlier this week that said that Joe Biden's really at his best from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that's when he is really, able to function and operate. He's a 6-hour-a-day president, if you believe those reports. And now it sounds like the guy needs a month to recover from going overseas on Air Force One to get his body clock back on track or something like that. I don't know. But forget the politics for a moment. Forget November 5th for a second. Can we get there? Can we make it the next 5 months? Can the country survive it? I don't mean to be overly dramatic. We will. But what I mean by that is what can happen in the next 5 months that sets this country back longer than we realize? I don't know the answer. We don't know the answer. I can't predict the future. If I could, I wouldn't be doing this right now. But man, there is so much happening right now in the country. There's been so much that's taken place over the last couple of years, so much that can happen over the next 5 months, not just in the country, but around the world, where our worst actors and worst enemies are looking at this, and they'd be dumb to not look at this situation right now and say, well, if we're ever going to pounce, if we're ever going to start making moves, we know Putin's already done it, right? Putin's already done it. Xi may not be far behind in China. If you're those guys, are you maybe expediting your plans based on what you've seen happen back here in the United States the last 6 days? Or are you taking a wait-and-see approach? Or are you going to try to take advantage of the turmoil that currently exists in the U.S.? 913-408-7957. That's the studio line and the text line. Pete, you have to realize it's exhausting going overseas to give our tax dollars away. That's very well done as we kick it off on a Wednesday morning here on KCMO Talk Radio. But there is one big pressing issue, one big thing lingering as the media turned on Joe Biden yesterday with 3 enormous stories, all of which were very embarrassing. What do? The lingering person in all of this, the person who is just waiting in the shadows, that is one of their biggest problems. I'll explain it next on KCMO 95.7 FM. We are streaming all morning long on the day before Independence Day on the KCMO Talk Radio app. It is increasingly likely that the only option that the Democrats can move ahead with is Kamala Harris, because she's the only person they can hand off Joe Biden's 100 plus, 200 plus, I think it's actually over $200 million war chest to. She's the only one. They can't insert Gavin Newsom, or anybody for that matter, and use the funds that Joe Biden has raised. And that is something that obviously matters, not just because the money's there and available, but how pissed off would you be if you were a big-time Democratic donor and you've given Joe Biden, check after check after check, and you might as well flush the money down the toilet. You can't piss off the donor class like that. So we did get numbers, by the way, on the fundraising, just so we have the numbers here right in front of us. Trump campaign cash on hand, end of June, $285 million. The Biden campaign has $240 million cash on hand. So they're both well above $200 million. Trump's got more than Biden. But you're going to leave $250 million on the table? If you're the Democrats, you can't. So that's why it's increasingly likely that Kamala Harris is going to be at the top of the ticket, which, trust me, I mean, woo, boy. I don't think it's popular at all. And the polling suggests that, and some polling that's come out here over the last 24 hours suggests that Kamala Harris loses to Donald Trump, but she actually may be a better bet than Joe Biden because of how he continues to sink in some of these polls. So Kamala Harris, who, frankly, I think they're better off sticking with Joe. I mean, I don't care what kind of state this guy's in. They are better off sticking with Joe than they are turning to Kamala. You put Kamala front and center at the top of the ticket, you are going to run people away faster than they're running away from Joe. Once they get to know Kamala, that thing is toast. That campaign is fried. At least with Biden, there still is amongst some older voters this perception that he's just, moderate old Joe for people who aren't paying attention. As much as he is governed and run like a radical, there still is this perception of, it's Joe Biden. Like, that's still out there. And if they carefully craft the next 5 months with the media's help, they might be able to pull that off. With Kamala, they don't have a choice. They don't have a choice. She will turn off every moderate possible very quickly. Even if they don't like Trump, they're going to look at this as a binary choice and say, you know what? I'm not going for that. So yesterday, Kamala was asked about this walking out of an event, and here's what she said.
We know that many in your party have expressed concerns about President Biden's health. Just this morning, Congressman Doggett said that he's calling on President Biden to withdraw from the race, given that there's too much at stake to risk a Trump victory. What's your response to this?
Look, Joe Biden is our nominee. We beat Trump once, and we're going to beat him again, period.
Are you ready to lead the country if necessary?
I am proud to be Joe Biden's running mate. Thank you.
By the way, her answer there should have been yes. I'm always prepared to lead the country. I have been for 3.5 years. That's what you have to say if you're the Veep. I mean, that's an easy one. That's a layup, right?
Yeah, one bad fall and she's in.
I mean, yeah. And that bad fall is more likely than ever before. It increases tenfold every single day. So the answer to that is I've been ready since, January 21st of 2021 to lead the country. That's what she should have said there, but even that layup, Kamala Harris can't get right. So here's the other issue that they have. Beyond the money, that's the major problem. But one of the other issues that they're facing right now is identity politics. Kamala Harris was selected for one reason and one reason only. She is a black woman. Now, that's not my opinion. Joe Biden said that after George Floyd was killed. He said that he would pick a woman of color, as they put it, to join him on the ticket. What he should have done is just picked Kamala Harris, so then the perception was she was the best person for the job. But when you have to permanently play the identity politics game, you have to announce what you're doing first. Which, by the way, is such an insult to anybody to say before the fact you're going to pick somebody who's a woman of color and then pick that person. And then everyone's just like, oh, they only picked her because of her gender and her race. Just pick the person and leave the rest of it out of it. But when you consistently live in a world of identity politics, this is what you get. So this is where they find themselves now. Can you really move on and skip over Kamala Harris for a white dude? Can the Democratic Party really do that? Based on how they have bought all into the idea of identity politics. They can't pass her over in many respects. If they did, they'd be admitting they were wrong to prioritize identity politics over merit, which they obviously can't do. They cannot afford to appear like they're putting merit over identity politics. So in many respects, they have no choice but to double down. It's their only option. They put themselves in this corner, and there's no way for them to get out of it unless they admit, whether it's directly or indirectly, that merit should matter more than your skin color, than your gender, than your sexual orientation. And if they do that, the jig is up. Avera Martin is a California delegate. She was on the Stephen A. Smith podcast yesterday, and she alluded to this very thing.
Where is there consensus? You've got to build consensus, and there is not consensus right now. If you pick a white man over Kamala Harris, black women, I can tell you this, we're going to walk away, we're going to blow the party up. If you pick the black woman...
Where you going to walk away to, Areva? Where you going to walk away to? You going to walk away? You ain't going to walk away to Trump?
Over Kamala Harris. So where are we getting agreement from on who this ideal Democratic candidate should be?
That's Avera Martin with Stephen A. Smith. Where you gonna go to? Oh my goodness gracious!
Stephen A. Smith is hilarious. I mean, a lot of people hate him. I think he's fun.
No, I actually don't mind Stephen A. I met him once. It's a long story, but I'll tell my Stephen A. Smith story at some point. I got a minute here. I'll tell the story. Stephen A. Smith and I, before he was Mr. First Take, he was down in the dumps. He was not having a good run in his career. He was trying to rebuild it prior to First Take. He was doing some fill-in radio work at ESPN 980 or 950 in Philadelphia, where I was interning. And we bumped into each other getting coffee in the break room. And he was a very nice, humble man. He was there at 5 a.m. He was cutting tapes to try to get himself some fill-in radio work. And now look at the guy. And he was very polite to me. He was very humble, very low-key. I think a lot of it's an act, but either way, very good guy. And he's not a crazy lefty, by the way. He's you know, when he does some politics on his podcast, he's pretty middle of the road. But the larger point there from Avera Martin is there will be a revolt amongst the DEI crowd if you pass over Kamala. So they've dug themselves into this ditch and they can't get out. So it's Joe or it's increasingly looking like it's Kamala. And either way, Trump being quiet right now is the best thing he can do. So it's Snuffleupagus coming up this weekend with the President of the United States. That's what's taking place this weekend as George Stephanopoulos, as some call him, is going to be hosting, or I should say conducting, a sit-down with Joe Biden. And this will be his first post-debate TV interview. And I think Joe's been holed up at Camp David for a week prepping for this with George. So he's going to sit down with George for the first time. It's going to take place on Friday, with the extended interview, as ABC News terms it, set to air on Sunday during this week and on Good Morning America on Monday. The first portions of the interview are going to air on World News Tonight on Friday evening with pretty boy David Muir. And then you'll have more clips throughout the weekend before Sunday morning this week with George Stephanopoulos. Now, there's two ways this can go. It can be a bounce back, fluff them up, rebound piece for Joe Biden. Or it can be the final nail in the coffin. It depends what Stephanopoulos and ABC News chooses to do. There is reason to believe, I know a lot of you are going to be of the mindset that this is going to be nothing more than a, fluff them up, make Biden look good, do some damage control kind of an interview. But it's entirely possible that's not at all what's going to happen here. Now, you might think, why would Team Biden agree to something like this if they thought Stephanopoulos was actually going to, be a capital J journalist? Remember, this guy worked as the press secretary for Bill Clinton. The notion that he's ever been an honest newsman is a joke. I mean, that's the amazing part of this. They take these people from politics and they want to convince you that they're honest journalists. He's not. And that's okay. He's allowed to be a guy who worked in politics. He's allowed to have worked for Bill Clinton. Like, that's his prerogative. Just don't then pitch him as a straight down the news or straight down the middle news guy, because he obviously isn't. And suggesting he is just lying to the American people's faces. So anyway, he's doing the interview. But when you look at where the news cycle has been the last 24 hours, you've got all these bad pieces coming out about Joe Biden. You've got the New York Times reporting yesterday that Joe Biden acknowledges, as we talked about last hour, he almost fell asleep on the debate stage. That was number one for the New York Times. You also had this piece saying Biden lapses are said to be increasingly common and worrisome. That from the New York Times. NBC News reporting yesterday that Hunter Biden is now becoming a staple, eerily, over the last few days at senior staff meetings in the White House. So all the mainstream media folks are putting out really negative stories about Joe Biden. And then I went to CNN.com last night, and the lead stories on CNN were the following. Number one, CNN poll, most voters think Democrats have a better chance of keeping the White House if Biden is not the nominee. And story number two on CNN.com I saw last night, as Biden digs in, some top Democrats want him out of the race this week. Media bias is not just driven by how you cover a story. It's also driven by what stories you cover, what stories you highlight, and what stories you present prominently to your audience. And CNN presenting those two stories at the top of their website last night, as they did, is telling to me. And when you stack it up with the NBC News report, you stack it up with the New York Times reports, something's going on here where the media has, I don't want to say colluded, but come to the obvious conclusion that Joe can't get it done for him, that Joe is no longer their guy. And maybe you're of the belief that Stephanopoulos is going to throw him a lifeline. That's possible. But I actually am starting to think that it's more likely that he sabotages him. That he doesn't treat this as the fluffy interview that Team Biden thinks it's going to be. Because it would just be weird for all of media to be swimming in one direction and then Stephanopoulos to go off the deep end on the other side. It seems unlikely to me. Now, it doesn't mean that Team Biden's not under the impression that Stephanopoulos might shoot it to him straight. But the more I'm seeing just across the media ecosystem, the less likely that feels to me. And with that being said, speaking of Stephanopoulos, who's set to do the interview with Joe Biden that's going to air on Friday and then again on Sunday during ABC this week and then I guess Monday on Good Morning America. I was thinking about a back and forth he had with Nikki Haley. And this back and forth with Nikki Haley really tells you all you need to know about where media was leading up to last Thursday. When if you suggested what you were seeing with your own two eyes with the president was concerning, well, you were the problem. Take a listen to this. Just remember, this is where your media was in the last few months, telling you not to believe your eyes and ears in a very Orwellian fashion when George Stephanopoulos talked to Nikki Haley.
There is no way that Joe Biden's going to finish his term. I think Kamala Harris is going to be the next president, and that should send a chill up every American spine. But I also think the fact that we have a primary.
Excuse me, 1 second, Ambassador. How do you know that Joe Biden's not going to finish his term? What is that based on?
Ask Americans, do you think he's going to finish his term? Do you think that he's actually going to finish what he started? We look at the decline he's had over the last few years. You have to be honest with the American people, George.
Again, you didn't answer the question. What evidence do you have that he's not going to finish the term? If what Americans feel has no basis on whether he's going to finish his term or not.
The American people know it.
You agree with Joe Biden on Ukraine, don't you?
Hey, let's talk Ukraine. I just keep thinking back to the George Orwell 1984 line. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. That's what we lived through up until last Thursday, when finally they realized we can't BS the American people anymore on this. 50 to 75 million of them just saw with their own eyes and their own ears what is undeniable. The mental acuity, the physical stamina is not there anymore. We tried to tell them for months to reject the evidence of their eyes and ears, but we can't do it anymore. And that's why you've seen this complete about face over the last 5 or 6 days. They realize if they want to maintain any credibility, they can't continue with this. And on top of that, they don't want to see Trump win anyway. So they've got to now get out of their own way and try to get Joe out of the way. And that's what's going on here as much as anything. 913-408-7957. That is the studio line and the text line here on KCMO. Pete, it doesn't matter what the party wants or what the media wants. Dr. Jill has no intention of leaving. Yeah, if you read that Vogue story that dropped this week, it certainly looks like she's enjoying the power of being the first lady. And power makes people weird. It corrupts them in very strange ways. There's no doubt about it. 913-408-7957. Got a minute for Paul. He is in Kansas City. What's up, Big Paul?
Hey, Pete. Yeah, Stephanopoulos got himself in a box. I watched the press conference from the binder yesterday, and she got hammered. And it was the first time I really saw the press go after her. They wanted to see the medical records, not just the 6-page from Doc Conley. Let's see the entire medical, and she's, deflecting. So you can see the press in the White House press briefing really go after her. So Stephanopoulos, if ABC edits this thing and turns it into a fluff piece, the Americans are just going to throw it in the garbage. So he's really in a tight spot.
He is. Well said there, Paul. Thank you, buddy. The Bill O'Reilly morning update's coming up next, and I will get to something I was thinking about with O'Reilly last night. We'll dive into it coming up on KCMO 95.7 FM, streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. That was a good morning update from Bill O'Reilly. So I was thinking about him last night. Stop, not in a weird, creepy way. All right, enough of that. I was thinking about him last night as I was watching the Karine Jean-Pierre White House press briefing yesterday. And this question was asked of Karine Jean-Pierre. And her body language, as much as anything, told me the answer here.
Is anyone in the White House hiding information about the president's health or his ability to do the job day to day?
Absolutely not.
So you hear it there and you hear her say confidently, absolutely not. But I was thinking about Bill O'Reilly's body language expert segment he used to have on The Factor. If you're a former viewer of the O'Reilly Factor from his, 25-year run nearly on Fox News where he, led all the ratings, led all of cable news. I mean, crushed everybody. No one's ever had... I started to sound like Trump when I said that. No one's ever seen ratings like O'Reilly.
The greatest ratings ever.
But seriously, he did have the biggest ratings in cable news history. He would do this segment, I want to say it was once a week, probably the last 5 years or so the show was on, where he'd have body language experts come on and analyze politicians. And not just politicians, but oftentimes just people in pop culture saying things and trying to figure out whether or not they were lying or not. Like what their body language said about what they were actually saying. And as I watched Karine Jean-Pierre answer that question, she knows where the question's going. And about halfway through the question, she starts to kind of sink and look down at the podium and look down at her feet. And she doesn't look the person in the eye when she answers the question and says, absolutely not. Now, does that mean she's lying? No. But I was thinking back to Bill O'Reilly's body language expert segment from his run on the O'Reilly Factor on Fox News. I feel like there would have been an expert who would have jumped on there, looked at that clip and said, yeah, she doesn't feel good about the answer, if nothing else.
Is anyone in the White House hiding information about the president's health or his ability to do the job day to day?
Absolutely not.
Like the minute the word hiding gets broken out, she starts to look down and sink. And maybe she's just telling the truth. It's all in the up and up. But that was a moment where I thought to myself, I need an O'Reilly body language expert on this one. That's what I thought about last night. because that was a disastrous press conference yesterday. But what do you do? Like, I actually, trust me, we can goof on Karine Jean-Pierre 4 hours a day. I'm not going to do it. That'd be kind of boring. But I did have some empathy for her yesterday, because imagine having to get up there and defend that. And by the way, she's really not used to anybody outside of our pal Sweet Pete Ducey asking her any kind of real tough questions. It has been kind of nice for an administration with a D next to its name to actually get real journalistic treatment, because usually it only happens when there's someone with an R next to their name in the White House, and they're people getting real journalism. It's like these people forget how to do journalism depending on who's in the White House. But they've gotten it the last few days, and they, for the most part, have not handled it all that well. 913-408-7957. Frank's in Overland Park. What's up, Frank? You're on KCMO.
Pete, oh my gosh, come on. She is flipping lying. Come on. We know this situation. She's lying. Saw a meme yesterday. It totally applies to this, and that is, I just hate it that people's pants don't catch on fire when they tell a lie. That's about all I got.
Thank you very much, Frank. Well, we got also Nancy Pelosi's input on all this. Now, remember, it was Monday. We played this clip of Nancy Pelosi on CNN where she claimed it wasn't Joe Biden who was struggling mentally. It was actually Donald Trump. And in 48 hours, she's totally flipped. Here is Nancy Pelosi on Monday.
My people are very much Biden, Kamala Harris. And this is an opportunity for Joe Biden to go out there and show he has the stamina and the rest. And by the way, while the press, and for some reason they don't, there are healthcare professionals who think that Trump has dementia, that his connection, his thoughts do not go together.
So that's Pelosi after half a bottle of vodka over the weekend on CNN saying it's really Trump who's got the dementia. I mean, it sounds like the arguments that probably happen in nursing homes. No, your dementia's way worse than mine, man. Hey, what's my name then, big guy? You know, I just can see these battles back and forth. So now Pelosi yesterday on MSNBC is singing a totally different tune.
So we have all these things that he was masterful in helping to orchestrate, to write, and to pass. So he has a vision, he has knowledge, he has judgment, he has a strategic thinking, and the rest. He has a bad night. Now, again, I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition?
What changed in 48 hours? It ties back to the conversation from earlier this morning, where it seems like the entire media has turned on Biden. Friendly media has turned on Biden. And Pelosi on Monday was saying, you're worried about Biden? Trump's got dementia. And now she's like, oh, is it just an episode or is it something more? What would cause that about face in all of 48 hours? Outside of maybe hitting the bottle before going on air on Sunday, but like outside of that, what would have changed the trajectory of Nancy Pelosi's approach? It's like the whole thing has been, in some respects, carefully coordinated and carefully crafted. And that's what makes this so fascinating. I mean, we're living through this historic moment right now together. And that's why, you know, I always say this show is a Kansas City show, right? Here on KCMO. And it is. But, man, right now, let's be honest. For the last few days, where Joe Biden goes from here is all anybody is talking about in news. So, boy, there's a lot going on. So this I shared last night on X, and I stumbled upon it. Sage Steele, former ESPN anchor. She's now out on her own, doing her own podcast deal, and left woke ESPN. And good for her. Good riddance to them. ESPN is a shell of what it used to be on that front. So she's doing her own deal, and she had on Wesley Hunt, a Texas congressman, and Byron Donalds. And all three of them are black, and they were kind of having this conversation about black America through their eyes, how some of the political winds are changing within the black community. And Wesley Hunt is also a guy who was here, I want to say it was 2 years ago. He was here in Johnson County. I believe it was for the Johnson County Republican annual fundraiser or annual dinner or something like that. But he was here because this guy was on the show before he came up here to Kansas for an event that he was a part of. So he's on this podcast last night with Sage Steele, and he tells the story about then President Trump and his handling of a Taliban leader during a meeting. This is as impressive a story as I've heard about Donald Trump during his time in office. And I want to play this story for you and then compare it to what you think and what we all believe we're dealing with right now on the world stage with our world leaders. Here's Wesley Hunt, Texas congressman with Sage Steele.
My favorite President Trump story. This is my number one favorite of all time. When we were negotiating with the Taliban, while President Trump was still the president, President Trump wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but he wanted a conditions-based withdrawal, meaning that you do what we tell you to do, and then we will start pulling troops back slowly as long as you abide by our rules. It's President Trump and Mike Pompeo, and they are talking to Taliban leadership in the room, and they had one translator in the room. President Trump looked at the Taliban leader and said this: I want to leave Afghanistan, but it's going to be a conditions-based withdrawal. And translator translated. And he said, if you harm a hair on a single American, I'm going to kill you. And the translator goes, and Trump goes, tell him.
Yes.
Tell him what I said. Tell him what I said. Reached in his pocket, pulled out a satellite photo of the leader of the Taliban's home and handed it to him.
Shut up.
Got up and walked out the room.
Sure did.
Do you know for 18 months not a single American was killed in Afghanistan?
Sure did.
That's the definition of strength. That's what I'm talking about. And so you could imagine that kind of sentiment being around the world. If we have an embassy in another country, no one's going to touch it.
How good is that? How good is that? Trump's sitting there, by the way, with Kansas's own Mike Pompeo. They're talking to the Taliban leader. They got one translator in the room. And Trump says to the guy, I want to pull out of Afghanistan. But if you touch an American, if you touch the hair on an American, we're going to kill you. And then he shares a photo, a satellite photo of the place that this Taliban leader lives. I mean, how good is that? That is just absolutely outstanding stuff, is it not? That is, taking mob mentality, and some of you are going to freak out or, it's just, okay, this works too, Mark. Gangster mentality, and applying it to our political climate in a very appropriate way. Thank you, Mark. But this is how, in many respects, you can apply being a business person to politics 101. When you're dealing with some of these horrible actors and horrible leaders, this is not dealing with Macron, right, in France. This is not dealing with any of these people in the EU. You're not dealing with, what's his name, Mr. Blackface up there in Canada, Trudeau. You're talking about horrible people who will willingly kill their citizens if they're gay or something like that. I mean, that's what they do in these places, right? They treat women like garbage. They use their own people to blow up Western culture if they see reason to and they see opportunity to. This is like, you're not talking about good human beings. And you need to walk into these rooms when you visit with them and make it very clear who's in charge and very clear who the boss is. And you hear a story like that with Donald Trump, and you compare it to, heck, go back to the Obama years when Obama's going around the Middle East, going on his apology tour. Remember that right after he got in office? Their approach during the 8 years of Obama was, we're going to apologize for American greatness, and we're going to see if these people like us. Like, they would go around the world to the worst actors and say, please like us. We're not like bad people. Just leave us alone. And, that certainly didn't work. Now, Obama ultimately got, bin Laden. And by the way, Joe apparently wasn't a fan of that plan. So give him that much credit. But for the most part, it was an appeasement approach. Now you've got Joe. And Joe's out there, and he's certainly not one who's going to project strength to the worst leaders on the world stage. Why do you think Putin now is doing what he's done the last couple of years in Ukraine? He sensed and smelled weakness from a mile away. Why do you think Xi is starting to drum things up in the Asia-Pacific region? He's smelling weakness. All these guys can smell it from a mile away. Middle East, Iran emboldened, making tons of money. Courtesy of energy policy in this country. They're smelling weakness. They're funding Hamas. You know, give me a couple of mean tweets right now if it means we'll have a leader on the world stage who's going to walk into the Taliban and say, you touch an American, you're dead. And show the guy a satellite photo of his home that you'll basically more or less blow up. If he does anything that you don't like. Let's go to Topeka. John is there. What's up, John?
Now, compare and contrast President Trump saying that to the Taliban leader versus when Obama went after Osama bin Laden, and the picture of him, all of his advisors were around the table watching the screen. Obama was in the corner cowering down.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That's not a picture of strength. That's a picture of, oh, what am I getting into?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Versus, Trump saying, I'm going to kill you.
Have a good 4th there, John. Thanks, buddy.
Happy 4th to you.
Yes. No, that's absolutely right. I mean, you tell me who you want in that situation room outside of Wolf Blitzer looking constipated. You tell me who you want in that room with leaders of the Taliban pulling no punches. Regardless, if you can set your general political feelings aside, and I know it's difficult to do, but put these two options on the table, take Trump's name out of it, that helps you come to a clear and coherent decision and answer on this, and say, what kind of leader do you want when it comes to projecting strength with the worst actors on the planet? I don't think the answer is a difficult one to come to if you can set aside just for a moment some of the bias.